Karen Mercer stood at the edge of Ryan Carter's driveway, holding an HOA notice against the flagpole she had ordered him to move. She had spent weeks insisting its height and setback violated community rules. Behind her, a survey crew pressed markers into the soil. Then, Karen looked down. The boundary line ran several feet behind the pole. The flagpole was not inside the land her HOA claimed to regulate. Ryan said nothing. Karen stared at the marker. If she had no authority there, why had she been finding him? Before we go back to the beginning, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe if you enjoy stories where ordinary people keep their cool and let the facts do the work. 3 weeks earlier, Ryan Carter had not been thinking about boundaries, covenants, or legal descriptions. He had been thinking about the front of his house. Ryan lived in Briar Glen, a quiet subdivision outside a mid-sized American city, in a brick 2-story house that sat near the edge of the development. Most of the homes deeper inside the neighborhood occupied neat rectangular lots. Ryan's did not. Lot 18 widened near the house, narrowed toward the road, and included a thin strip along the front that had been described separately in the paperwork from his closing. Ryan remembered the odd shape only because the title agent had paused over it earlier, tapped the survey copy, and told him to keep every page. He had kept it all. The deed packet sat in a gray file box in the study. A folded subdivision plat was tucked behind the title policy. Near the driveway, 2 old metal survey pins were buried low enough that Ryan had almost forgotten they existed. None of that seemed important when he decided to clean up the front yard. He replaced a dying hedge, reset several pavers, and installed a metal flagpole beside the driveway. The pole was not enormous. It did not block a neighbor's view or stretch over the sidewalk. It stood on a concrete base Ryan had placed several feet back from the pavement, on ground he had mowed, landscaped, and maintained since buying the property. To him, it was an ordinary home project. The first person from the HOA to pay attention was Karen Mercer. Karen had served as president of the Briar Glen Homeowners Association for 4 years. She was known for walking the neighborhood with a tablet tucked under one arm, stopping to photograph overgrown shrubs, trash cans left visible from the street, faded mailbox posts, and exterior changes that had not gone through the architectural committee. When Karen stopped near his driveway one Tuesday afternoon, Ryan expected a comment about the new landscaping. Instead, she studied the pole, glanced toward the curb, then looked back at the tablet in her hand. "Did you submit that?" Ryan rested the garden hose against the brick border. The flagpole, the installation. He told her he had checked the rules he could find and had not seen anything prohibiting it. Karen's expression did not change. She said the issue was not whether flags were allowed. Briar Glen had requirements for exterior structures, including height and setback standards. She would check the file and let him know if an application was needed. Ryan nodded. There was no shouting, no threat, and no reason for him to think the conversation would become anything larger than a paperwork question. 2 days passed. Ryan received no email, no phone call, and no request for measurements. On Saturday morning, while taking a bag of grass clippings toward the garage, he noticed Karen's SUV moving slowly along the opposite side of the street. She stopped briefly near the corner, took a photograph in the direction of his yard, then drove on. He did not think much of it. On Monday, Ryan opened his mailbox and found a white envelope printed with the Briar Glen Association logo. The return address belonged to the management company that handled dues and compliance notices. He carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and opened it with the edge of a grocery receipt. The first line called the flagpole an unapproved exterior structure. The second cited a height restriction. The third said the pole failed the required setback from the community boundary. Ryan read that phrase twice, community boundary. He turned the page expecting a warning or a request for an application. Instead, a bold line near the bottom gave him 10 days to submit a relocation plan. Above it, in capital letters, was the notice type. Final architectural violation. Ryan stared at the words. Final was a strange place to begin. The notice listed 2 violations under separate lines. The first said Ryan's flagpole exceeded the permitted height for an exterior accessory structure. The second said its concrete base failed a required setback from what the letter called the association's community boundary. Karen was careful about one point. She never wrote that Ryan could not fly the American flag. She did not tell him to remove the flag itself. Every instruction focused on the pole, its location, and the claim that the installation had been placed inside an area governed by Briar Glen's architectural rules. The distinction mattered. According to the letter, Ryan had 10 days to submit a relocation plan. After that, the association could begin adding a $50 daily fine until the violation was corrected. The notice also warned that continued noncompliance could trigger a hearing before the board. Ryan did not call Karen. He did not post the letter online. He sat at his kitchen table with the notice, opened the association's online portal, and pulled up the architectural standards referenced in the citation. The height provision was easy to find. The setback language was not. The standards mentioned fences, sheds, detached structures, and landscaping near common areas. They referred several times to lot lines and easements, but Ryan could not find the phrase community boundary in the section Karen had cited. So he sent a short email. He asked for the exact rule the HOA believed applied to the flagpole. He asked which boundary line had been used to calculate the setback, and he asked for the survey, legal description, or recorded document showing that the ground beneath the pole fell within the association's enforcement area. Karen answered the next morning. Her message was polite, brief, and absolute. She attached a color architectural map of Briar Glen. The houses were arranged in pale blocks, the streets were marked in gray, and a thick green outline wrapped around the development. Ryan's property sat near the lower edge. On Karen's map, the green line passed in front of his house in a way that placed the flagpole inside the outlined area. Karen wrote that the map had been used by the architectural committee for years and that the required setback was measured inward from that line. Ryan enlarged the image. Then he opened the PDF copy of his deed. The shape was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not enough that someone driving past the house would ever notice. But the angle near the front of Lot 18 did not match the angle on his closing documents. On the deed exhibit, the line narrowed near the road and then cut back toward the driveway. On the HOA map, it ran almost straight. Ryan printed both pages. He placed them side by side. The more he looked, the less the two documents seemed to describe the same boundary. He emailed Karen again and asked whether the architectural map had been created from a recorded survey. Her response arrived 2 hours later. It said the map was the association's current official plan and had been approved by the board. It did not answer whether a surveyor had prepared it. It did not identify a recording number. It did not include a legal description. Ryan read the message once, then saved it into a folder on his laptop. One map showed the association's working boundary. The other showed the recorded land. Ryan did not yet know which document controlled the dispute, but he knew they could not both describe the same line around Lot 18. The irritation he had felt when he opened the first notice was changing into something else. Curiosity. Karen had a map. Ryan wanted to know what created the line on that map. He pulled the old gray file box from the study closet and began separating the papers from his closing. The deed went on one side. The title policy went on another. Behind them was the folded subdivision plat he had not opened in years. When he spread it across the table, he found the front edge of Lot 18. The line did not match Karen's map. And for the first time, Ryan wondered whether they were measuring from two different boundaries entirely. The next evening, Ryan cleared the dining table and laid out every document connected to the property. His warranty deed identified Lot 18 by reference to the recorded subdivision plat. The title policy contained a legal description. A county parcel printout showed the tax parcel in simplified form. The HOA declaration included its own exhibit, describing which property had been submitted to the association's covenants. At first glance, they all seemed to refer to the same neighborhood. They did not describe it the same way. Ryan began with the easiest distinction. The property line told him what land he owned. The subdivision plat showed how lots, roads, easements, and tracts had been divided and recorded. The HOA declaration answered a different question: which land had actually been subjected to the association's private covenants. Those concepts overlapped through most of Briar Glen. Near Lot 18, they became messy. On the old subdivision plat, the front of Ryan's property contained a narrow area with a separate notation. The printed label was small enough that he needed to use the camera on his phone to enlarge it. The line around that strip bent inward near the driveway, then followed the road at an angle. Karen's architectural map erased that distinction. Its green boundary swept across the entire frontage as if the odd little strip had never existed. Ryan did not assume that proved anything. Documents change. Associations amend declarations. Developers add property. Easements are revised. A map recorded when a subdivision is created may not tell the whole story years later. So Ryan searched the county recorder's online index. He found the original declaration, 2 amendments involving maintenance obligations, 1 amendment changing voting language, and a later document adding a small parcel near the community pool. He found nothing that obviously added the strip in front of Lot 18. He sent Karen another email. This time he was more specific. He included the plat book and page number printed on his closing documents. He referenced the exhibit attached to the recorded declaration. Then he asked for the amendment, supplemental declaration, annexation instrument, or other recorded document that placed the disputed strip under HOA architectural control. Karen replied with a PDF titled Briar Glen Exterior Standards Revised. Ryan opened it. The document contained rules about fences, sheds, basketball goals, paint colors, roof materials, antennas, and accessory structures. It had a board approval date near the bottom and Karen's signature on the final page. It was not recorded with the county. It did not contain a legal description. It did not explain why the green boundary on the architectural map differed from the recorded plat. Ryan wrote back with one sentence. "Can you send me the document that changes the property shown on Exhibit A?" Karen did not answer that question. Instead, the management company sent him a reminder that the compliance deadline was approaching. Ryan saved that email too. By then, he had created a folder with subfolders for every notice, map, declaration, amendment, and message. He renamed each file by date. He printed the most important pages and placed sticky tabs beside every recording number. He was not building a lawsuit. He was trying to answer a basic question before anyone spent money moving a pole. On the third night, he took the plat outside with a flashlight and walked toward the driveway. Near the grass line, partly hidden beneath soil and roots, he found one of the old metal pins shown on his closing survey. 20 feet away, he found the second. The angle between them looked much closer to the recorded plat than to Karen's green line. Ryan crouched beside the first pin and photographed it with the house visible in the background. Then he looked at the flagpole. If the old markers were still in the correct places, Karen's setback calculation had not simply used a slightly different measurement. It had started from a different line. The documents were no longer paperwork. Each described a kind of authority, and none of Karen's replies showed when that authority crossed the disputed ground outside Ryan's home. The next morning, Ryan asked the HOA one final written question before calling a surveyor. If the declaration's recorded exhibit did not include that strip, who had decided that the association could regulate it? Karen arrived at Ryan's house on Thursday afternoon with Susan Blake, the vice president of the HOA, and a yellow measuring tape. Ryan saw them from the kitchen window before the doorbell rang. Karen had the architectural map on a clipboard. Karen said the board wanted to give Ryan a clear path to compliance. If he moved the pole farther inward, she explained, the association would close the violation and waive the first round of daily fines. Ryan asked her to show him the line she was measuring from. Karen walked to the edge of the sidewalk and stretched the tape toward the pole. She used a landscaping joint near the curb as her starting point, then called out the distance. "That's the boundary we use," she said. Then he walked several feet toward the driveway and pushed aside a patch of grass with the toe of his shoe. A small metal survey pin appeared in the soil. "What about this?" Karen barely looked at it. "Old markers get moved all the time." Susan glanced from the pin to the map. Ryan asked whether a surveyor had verified the curbside line. Karen said the committee had relied on the same community plan for years. She tapped the paper with one finger and repeated that the map had been approved by the board. Ryan did not argue with her. He asked Susan to note that he had requested a survey subscription and had not received one. Karen's tone tightened. "A private survey won't change the HOA rules." Ryan nodded. "Then it should tell us where the rules start." For the first time that afternoon, Karen stopped talking. Then she pulled the tape farther across the lawn and marked a spot with orange landscape paint. According to her calculation, Ryan needed to relocate the flagpole nearly 11 feet toward the house. That meant breaking the existing concrete base, digging a new footing, moving an underground landscape wire, and repairing the old location. Ryan asked whether the association would reimburse the work if the boundary turned out to be wrong. Karen said the homeowner was responsible for correcting violations. Before leaving, Karen handed Ryan an updated notice. The daily fines would begin after the original deadline, whether or not he hired a surveyor. The next morning, Ryan called Lauren Mitchell, a licensed land surveyor whose firm had worked on several older subdivisions in the county. Lauren asked him to email the deed, the original plat, the closing survey, the HOA declaration, and Karen's architectural map. 2 hours later, Lauren called back. She did not tell him he was right. She said she needed to review the records and locate the monuments in the field. But she did say something that changed the way Ryan understood the dispute. A setback is only as useful as the line you measure it from. That weekend, while he was replacing mulch near the mailbox, his neighbor Daniel Price stopped beside the driveway. Daniel lived 3 houses down on another lot along the outer edge of Briar Glen. He had seen Karen Susan measuring the yard. Ryan explained that the HOA believed his pole was too close to the community boundary. Daniel frowned. "Which boundary?" Ryan showed him the green map. Daniel stared at it for several seconds. Then he laughed once, without humor. 2 years earlier, the HOA had made him move part of a wooden fence because Karen said it crossed the same kind of setback line. Daniel had never hired a surveyor. The cost of fighting seemed higher than the cost of moving 6 fence panels, so he had paid a contractor and moved them. "Same map?" Ryan asked. Daniel went inside and returned with an old violation packet. The green outline looked almost identical. Ryan photographed it but made no conclusion. It did, however, give the question a larger shape. On Monday morning, Lauren arrived with 2 crew members, a total station, marking flags, and copies of the recorded plat. She studied Karen's map for less than a minute. Then she folded it in half. "The setback measurement isn't the first problem," she said. Ryan looked toward the orange paint Karen had left in his grass. Lauren pointed instead toward the old survey pin. "The first problem is deciding which line anyone had the right to measure from." Lauren did not begin with the flagpole. She began with records. Her crew located the monuments referenced in Ryan's deed, checked the recorded subdivision plat, compared bearings and distances, and tied the field measurements back to county control points. One person worked near the road while another moved along the side yard. Small flags appeared in the grass, but Lauren refused to call any of them final until the measurements closed. Ryan watched from the porch for a while, then went inside. That was the part he found reassuring. Nobody was trying to make the physical evidence fit a conclusion. By mid-afternoon, Lauren had found both old pins Ryan remembered from his closing survey. Their positions matched the recorded calls within the tolerances she expected. She also found a monument farther down the road that helped confirm the angle of the frontage. The green line on Karen's architectural map did not follow those points. It sat farther outward. Lauren returned 2 days later with a preliminary drawing. She spread it across Ryan's dining table and placed Karen's map beside it. On Lauren's drawing, one line showed Ryan's property boundary. Another showed the perimeter of the property described in the recorded HOA declaration. Near most of the neighborhood, the 2 systems overlapped in the way anyone would expect. Near the front of Lot 18, they separated. The narrow strip Ryan had noticed in his closing papers was real. It belonged to Ryan's parcel, but the legal description attached to the declaration stopped before that strip. The flagpole base sat inside Ryan's property. It also sat outside the land described as being subjected to the declaration Karen had been citing. Ryan leaned over the drawing. "So the pole isn't on HOA property?" Lauren shook her head. "That's not the right way to say it. The HOA doesn't have to own land to enforce covenants. What this shows is that your pole is on land you own, and this recorded description does not include that piece." Ryan nodded slowly. That distinction mattered more than the dramatic version. He had not discovered that the flagpole was on public land. He had not accidentally installed it on a neighbor's parcel. The issue was narrower and more important. Karen had measured a covenant setback as if the association's recorded boundary extended across ground. The documents did not appear to subject to those covenants. Lauren pointed to the 2 lines on the survey. They're different questions. Ownership is one. Covenant jurisdiction is another. Ryan asked whether that ended the violation. Lauren leaned back. "No. I can tell you where the lines are. I can tell you what the recorded documents and monuments show. I can't tell you what legal argument the association might make about its governing documents." Lauren completed the certified survey and added references to the plat book, deed calls, located monuments, and the declaration exhibit Ryan had provided. The final sheet made the disagreement visible in seconds. Karen's internal map placed the community line several feet beyond the line supported by the recorded description. Ryan scanned the survey and emailed it to Karen, Susan, the property manager, and the association's compliance address. His message was 4 sentences. He attached the certified survey. He asked that the violation be withdrawn. He asked that the daily fines be suspended while the board reviewed the jurisdiction issue. Then he waited. The property manager acknowledged receipt before noon. Susan replied that afternoon and said she wanted the board's attorney to review the materials. Karen did not respond until the following morning. Her email contained no discussion of the survey measurements. It did not dispute Lauren's license, the monument locations, or the legal description. Instead, Karen wrote that the violation remained active because Ryan had failed to comply with a duly issued architectural notice. A new PDF was attached. The heading was different. Non-compliance after noter. The fine schedule continued. Ryan read the page twice, then opened the original violation beside it. The first notice said the pole violated a setback because of where it stood. The survey challenged the line used to create that violation. Karen's answer was no longer about the line. It was about Ryan's refusal to obey the notice. For a few minutes, he stared at the two PDFs on the screen. He had expected the survey to close the dispute. Instead, it had forced the dispute to change shape. Karen's next argument arrived in an email copied to the entire board. She wrote that Ryan was focusing too narrowly on the physical boundary. As a member of the Briar Glen Association, she said he was subject to architectural standards governing exterior improvements connected to his residence. In her view, those obligations followed the homeowner even if a structure happened to sit on a portion of the parcel described differently in older documents. Then he opened the declaration and searched for the language she had used. He found provisions binding owners of property subjected to the declaration. He found sections describing architectural approval for improvements on lots governed by the covenants. He found enforcement procedures. He did not find a sentence saying architectural authority followed a person onto any land that person happened to own. So he asked Karen for the section. She said the board should stop adding fines until council could review the declaration, the certified survey, and the discrepancy in the maps. Karen replied 12 minutes later. She disagreed. According to her, pausing enforcement would encourage homeowners to ignore notices simply by challenging the association's interpretation. She proposed an emergency compliance vote to affirm the violation while legal review continued. The board was splitting. He did not call individual directors to pressure them or show up at their houses. He kept doing the same thing he had done from the beginning. He documented. He saved Karen's original map. He saved the revised notice. He saved the certified survey. He downloaded the meeting notice for the proposed emergency vote and added it to the folder by date. 3 documents now sat at the center of everything: the deed, the declaration, and Lauren's survey. The deed showed the land Ryan owned. The declaration described the land subjected to the covenants. The survey showed where those descriptions landed on the ground. Karen's argument depended on treating those distinctions as irrelevant. Then Daniel Price called. The neighbor with the old fence violation had spoken to another homeowner along the outer edge of Briar Glen. That homeowner, Melissa Grant, had been told 3 years earlier to move a masonry mailbox because it was too close to what the HOA called the community boundary. She emailed it to Ryan. The attached map was the same style as Karen's map. The same thick green outline appeared along the outside edge of the subdivision. A second neighbor sent a landscaping notice involving a row of stone edging. Ryan put the files in a separate folder labeled Other Properties. He was careful about what they did not prove. They did not prove every violation was invalid. They did not prove those homeowners owned land outside the declaration. They did not prove Karen had knowingly used a false boundary. But they did show something worth checking. The association had relied on the same type of internal map in more than one enforcement action along the edge of the neighborhood. Ryan forwarded the examples to Susan and asked one question. Had the HOA ever compared that map to the recorded legal descriptions for those parcels? Susan replied that she did not know. Karen replied that prior enforcement matters were confidential and irrelevant to Ryan's violation. The next day, the property manager sent formal notice of the emergency hearing. Karen's proposed agenda had 2 items. First, affirm the flagpole violation. Second, clarify that architectural authority applied to all exterior improvements associated with a member's residence. That second line caught Ryan's attention. The original notice had relied on a setback from a community boundary. Now the proposed resolution sounded as if the board wanted to create a broader rule after the dispute had already started. Ryan forwarded the agenda to Mark Reynolds, a local attorney who worked in real estate and title matters. A friend had given Ryan his number after hearing about the survey. Mark called that evening. He asked Ryan to send the complete declarations, every amendment, the certified survey, the architectural map, and the exact language of the proposed resolution. Then he asked a question Ryan had not considered. Has anyone checked when that green map was created? Ryan looked at the PDF properties. The document was much newer than the subdivision. For the first time, the question was not simply whether Karen had interpreted the boundary incorrectly. It was how long Briar Glen had been enforcing that interpretation, and what had happened to homeowners who never challenged it. Mark Reynolds did not begin by talking about lawsuits. He began by asking for recording numbers. Ryan emailed the documents on Tuesday morning. By noon, Mark had created a timeline showing when the subdivision plat was recorded, when the original declaration took effect, when each amendment was filed, and when the architectural map first appeared in Ryan's correspondence. The recorded plat and declaration were decades old. The green architectural map was not. Its metadata showed that the current version had been created 8 years earlier, long after the developer had turned control of the association over to the homeowners. A note in old board minutes described it as an updated community plan, prepared to make landscaping and compliance inspections easier. That sounded practical. Mark searched the county index for anything filed around the same time. He found board resolutions, a management contract memorandum, and several releases involving common area maintenance. He found no document annexing the disputed strip at Lot 18 into the declaration. Ryan asked whether that meant the map was worthless. Mark corrected him, no. It may be useful for administration. The question is whether anyone is treating it as if it can change a recorded legal description. That was the pattern Ryan kept seeing. Every time he wanted a simple yes or no, the documents forced a more precise question. Mark asked for the notices Daniel, Melissa, and the other Edgelot homeowners had shared. He compared each location to the original subdivision plat. The similarities were enough to justify concern, but not enough to declare that every old violation was wrong. Daniel's fence line might have crossed a separate easement. Melissa's mailbox could have been subject to a road restriction. Another homeowner's landscaping might have fallen under a different section of the covenants. Mark refused to turn 3 examples into a conspiracy. Instead, he asked the association for the source document behind the green line. She attached a plan labeled Briar Glen Community Boundary Update. The title block carried the association's name, a revision date, and a note saying it had been approved for architectural enforcement. Mark looked for a county recording stamp. There was none. He looked for a surveyor's seal. There was none. He looked for a legal description incorporated into a supplemental declaration. There was none. The plan appeared to be an internal administrative drawing that did not automatically make every use of it improper. It did, however, leave the same question unanswered. What recorded instrument gave the board the right to treat the line on that drawing as a covenant boundary? Mark sent a formal letter to the association. The letter did not threaten damages. It did not accuse Karen of fraud. It requested every recorded amendment, supplemental declaration, annexation instrument, easement, or other document the HOA believed expanded its authority over the strip in front of Lot 18. It also requested that fines be suspended until the board completed that review. Susan supported the request. 2 other directors agreed. Karen did not. She wrote that the community plan reflected long-standing practice and that homeowners had relied on consistent architectural enforcement for years. Mark forwarded that sentence to Ryan with a short note. Practice and recorded authority are not the same question. By then, the flagpole dispute had become something Ryan had never expected when he poured the concrete base beside his driveway. It had started with 1 structure, then 1 boundary, then 3 neighboring enforcement files. Now the association's entire method for identifying its outer compliance line was under review. Still, Mark kept narrowing the claim. He told Ryan not to say the HOA had illegally fined everyone. They did not know that. He told him not to accuse Karen of knowingly using a false map. They did not know that either. What they knew was simpler. Karen had issued Ryan a violation using a boundary shown on an internal plan. A certified survey and the recorded declaration did not support that line at his property. The HOA had not yet produced a recorded document that changed it. That was enough for the board's attorney to become concerned. Late Friday afternoon, Susan forwarded an email from Association Counsel. Council recommended pausing all fines connected to Ryan's flagpole until the jurisdiction issue was resolved. The email also advised the board not to adopt any resolution affecting the dispute until council could review the chain of title and governing documents. Ryan read it twice. Then another email arrived. Karen had scheduled the hearing anyway. By Monday morning, the dispute appeared to have reached the point where reasonable people could end it. The association's attorney had seen enough to recommend a pause. Lauren's certified survey placed the physical lines on the ground. Mark's review showed that the declaration and the internal enforcement map did not describe the front of Lot 18 the same way. Susan and 2 other directors wanted the violation withdrawn while the documents were sorted out. Ryan agreed. He was not asking the HOA to dissolve. He was not demanding a public apology. He was not trying to turn the flagpole into a symbol of a larger political fight. He wanted the notice removed, the fines canceled, and the pole left where it stood. Susan proposed exactly that in an email to the board. Rescind the current violation. Reverse any fines tied to it. Ask council to review the boundary map. Correct the map if necessary. Then decide whether other edge parcels needed separate review. For several hours, no one objected. Ryan thought the case might be over. Karen answered shortly after lunch. She opposed rescinding anything. Her message said withdrawing the notice would undermine the architectural committee and create uncertainty about prior enforcement. She argued that the board needed to preserve consistent standards while council completed its review. Then she attached a proposed resolution. The new language did something the original violation had not. Instead of defining authority by reference to the disputed community boundary, it said architectural approval requirements applied to exterior improvements associated with the residence of any association member, including improvements located on contiguous property under common ownership. Ryan read the sentence twice. Then he called Mark. Mark asked when the resolution had been drafted. The document property showed that it had been created 3 days after Lauren's survey reached the board. It did raise an obvious question. Could the board adopt a broader rule for future situations? Possibly, depending on the governing documents and applicable law. Could it use a newly written resolution to transform an old notice that had cited a different boundary and a different theory? He sent a letter to the board that afternoon. The letter was narrow. It did not tell the directors they lacked all authority over Ryan. It did not claim the proposed language was automatically invalid. It asked them to separate two questions that Karen's resolution blended together. What rules could the HOA lawfully adopt going forward, and what authority supported the violation already issued to Ryan weeks earlier? Susan forwarded Mark's letter to Association Council. Council responded that the hearing should be postponed until the board had complete records. Karen refused to remove it from the calendar. She wrote that the homeowner had already received multiple opportunities to comply, and that further delay rewarded non-compliance. For weeks, Ryan had been asking what line the HOA was using and what document created it. Now Karen was describing the problem as Ryan's unwillingness to obey. One director asked why fines had continued after the survey arrived. Another asked why the proposed resolution had been drafted before council finished reviewing the declaration. Susan asked whether the architectural committee had ever been given a survey supporting the green boundary. No one produced one. The property manager then circulated the hearing packet. It included Karen's original violation, the green architectural map, Ryan's email history, Lauren's survey, and the proposed resolution. It did not include a recorded amendment changing Exhibit A. Ryan noticed the omission immediately. If Karen had a document that solved the boundary problem, the hearing packet was the place to put it. There was nothing. That should have been the end. Instead, Karen sent Ryan one more notice. He had until noon on the day before the hearing to submit a relocation plan. If he did, she wrote, the committee would recommend reducing the accumulated fines. If he did not, the board would consider the full enforcement history as evidence of deliberate noncompliance. Ryan forwarded the notice to Mark without comment. A minute later, his phone rang. Mark's advice was simple. Do not argue about the flag. Do not argue about Karen. Make them identify the authority for the line. Ryan looked through the window toward the pole. The flag moved lightly in the afternoon wind. Nothing about it had changed since the day he installed it. Only the explanation for why it supposedly had to move kept changing. And now Karen was trying to force a board vote before the people voting had finished reading the documents. The final deadline arrived on Wednesday. At 8:04 that morning, Karen emailed Ryan and copied the board. She reminded him that a relocation plan was due by noon. If he submitted one, the committee would treat it as voluntary compliance. If he did not, the fines would continue through the hearing. Ryan did not send a relocation plan. He sent a record. The first attachment was Lauren Mitchell's certified survey. The second was his deed description. The third was Exhibit A from the recorded declaration. The fourth was the county parcel record. The fifth was a timeline beginning with Karen's first visit to the driveway and ending with the latest noncompliance notice. Every page had a date. Every recorded document had a book page or instrument reference where available. Every email in the timeline linked back to the original message. Mark called it the simplest possible version of a chain of custody. Nobody had to trust Ryan's memory. They could open the source. Karen answered with a different kind of argument. She said Briar Glen had an obligation to preserve appearance, uniformity, and predictable standards. Allowing one homeowner to avoid architectural review because of an old boundary irregularity, she warned, could invite dozens of similar claims. Ryan replied once. He said he was not asking for an exception to a valid rule. He was asking the board to identify the recorded authority that made the rule applicable to the ground where the pole stood. He did not mention the flag. He did not debate aesthetics. He did not accuse Karen of targeting him. That kept the issue narrow. Then Susan called. She had learned that Karen had contacted a contractor 2 days earlier and requested an estimate for relocating the flagpole. The contractor had been given photographs of Ryan's property and told the board might require the work after the hearing. Susan was furious. Not because a quote had been requested, but because the request made it sound as if the outcome of a board vote had already been decided. Ryan asked whether anyone planned to enter his property. Susan said no. The contractor had not been authorized to touch anything, and counsel had warned the board against self-help while the dispute remained unresolved. That mattered. The story did not need someone tearing down the pole to become serious. The serious part was that Karen appeared to be planning the remedy before the board had settled whether a violation existed. At 11:37, 23 minutes before Karen's deadline, Mark emailed the board. His message contained no relocation plan. Instead, he asked counsel to answer 3 questions at the hearing. What recorded document subjected the disputed strip to the declaration? What provision allowed a later board resolution to expand the geographic scope of recorded covenants? And if the original violation relied on a boundary the association could not document, what lawful basis remained for the accumulated fines? At noon, Karen sent a one-line response. Non-compliance will be noted. Ryan saved it. The hearing was scheduled for 6:30 the next evening at the community clubhouse. By late afternoon, Susan had persuaded a majority of directors to ask the property manager for the complete original declaration file rather than the scanned copy routinely used by the board. The manager searched archived records and contacted the title company that had handled an older refinancing of the common property. Nothing new appeared before the office closed. Then, at 4:52 the following afternoon, less than 2 hours before the hearing, Mark called Ryan. Check your email. A scanned document was attached. It was not a new amendment. It was an older, clearer copy of the original recorded exhibit. Ryan enlarged the lower corner near the legal description for the outer lots. There, beside the narrow frontage associated with Lot 18, was a notation that had been nearly unreadable in the compressed copy he had received at closing. The wording was short. Mark told Ryan not to celebrate until counsel confirmed what it meant in the full document. But if the notation read the way it appeared to read, Karen's map had not merely simplified a crooked line. It had omitted a recorded exclusion. Ryan printed the exhibit at full size. He placed it behind Lauren's survey in a black folder. At 6:12, he walked into the clubhouse. The room was quiet except for the projector fan. Directors shuffled printed packets, counsel joined by video, and Susan placed the certified survey where every board member could reach it. Karen was already there. Her green map was projected on the wall. The hearing began at 6:30 with 11 homeowners sitting in folding chairs along the back wall. Karen opened with the same position she had maintained for weeks. The flagpole, she said, was an exterior structure installed without proper approval. The architectural map on the wall showed it inside Briar Glen's enforcement boundary. The association had used that boundary consistently, and Ryan had refused multiple opportunities to correct the violation. She spoke for 6 minutes. Ryan spoke for less than 1. He said he was not asking the board to decide whether it liked the flagpole, whether it preferred another location, or whether architectural standards were useful. He asked the board to decide one question first. Did the recorded documents give the association covenant authority over the ground beneath the pole? Then Lauren stood. She placed the certified survey on an easel and explained the drawing without legal conclusions. She showed the monuments her crew had located. She showed the property line. She showed the perimeter described by the declaration exhibit. Then she pointed to the flagpole base. It sat on Ryan's land. It sat beyond the declaration line she had been asked to plot. Karen interrupted and said the association's community plan used a different boundary. Lauren nodded toward the projection. I can see that. Karen asked which map was newer. The community plan is newer. Karen looked toward the directors as if the answer settled the issue. Lauren continued. Newer does not tell me what was recorded. My survey locates the descriptions you provided in the monuments found in the field. The room went quiet. Mark spoke next by video. He shared the clearer scan of the original exhibit that had arrived that afternoon. Near the frontage of Lot 18, the recorded document contained a notation referring to the narrow strip as excluded from the property subjected to the declaration. Mark emphasized that the notation did not erase every rule Ryan might face. It answered the premise behind this notice. The board could debate policy later, but first it had to confront the document recorded against the property and the survey locating that document clearly on the ground. Counsel asked the property manager to display the recording stamp. The manager did. Counsel asked Mark to enlarge the notation. He did. Karen leaned toward the screen. She argued that the board's updated community plan reflected the intended boundaries of Briar Glen and years of practical enforcement. Homeowners, she said, had understood the outer line as part of the community for a long time. Counsel did not argue with her about intent. He asked for the instrument that changed the recorded description. Karen pointed to the board-approved plan. Counsel asked whether it had been recorded as an amendment or supplemental declaration. No one answered. Susan asked the property manager. The manager shook her head. Counsel then put the hierarchy in plain terms. The board had internal rules, resolutions, and maps for administration. Those materials could be important, but the violation before them had been issued on the premise that a particular location fell within property, subjected to recorded covenants. The certified survey, an original exhibit, now created a serious problem with that premise, and the board had not produced a recorded instrument resolving it in the association's favor. Karen returned to consistency. What happens to enforcement if every homeowner challenges the map? Counsel answered calmly. Then the association verifies the boundary before enforcing a boundary-based violation. That was the sentence that ended the argument. Not a threat, not a speech, a procedure. Susan made a motion to rescind Ryan's flagpole violation, cancel every fine arising from it, and suspend enforcement based on the disputed outer boundary until council completed a parcel-by-parcel review. Another director seconded. Karen objected that the motion was premature. The vote was called. 4 directors voted yes. Karen voted no. The motion passed. Ryan did not smile at Karen. He did not turn toward the homeowners in the back of the room. He simply closed the folder in front of him. The flagpole would not move. But Susan was not finished. She made a second motion directing the management company to identify prior boundary-based violations on the outer lots and preserve the related files for review. This time, one director hesitated before voting. Then the motion passed 4-1 again. Daniel Price, sitting in the back row, looked down at the old fence notice in his hands. Melissa Grant had brought her mailbox file. Karen stared at the projected green line. For weeks, that line had been presented as the answer. Now it had become the question. The review began the following week. For Ryan, the immediate result was simple. The property manager issued a written confirmation that the flagpole violation had been rescinded. The account ledger showed a zero balance for every fine connected to the case. The hearing record noted that the association would take no further action against the pole based on the disputed boundary. Council recommended reviewing the outer lots individually rather than announcing that every prior enforcement action was invalid. Each parcel had its own deed, easements, amendments, and physical improvements. A fence case might involve a utility easement that had nothing to do with the declaration line. A mailbox might sit inside a road right-of-way. A shed could violate a rule even if one setback calculation had been wrong. The management company pulled 7 years of architectural notices involving properties along Briar Glen's perimeter. Files were sorted by address, type of violation, and the boundary reference used by the inspector. Where a notice depended on the Green Community Plan, council compared it against recorded documents before deciding what should happen next. Others did. Daniel Price's fence case was reopened. His contractor invoice was still in the packet he had saved, along with photographs showing the original fence position. The review found that the relocation order had relied on the same unsupported outer line used in Ryan's case. The board offered Daniel a reimbursement for the portion of the work tied directly to that mistaken requirement. Melissa Grant's mailbox file turned out differently. The HOA boundary issue was present, but a separate county site distance restriction affected the location as well. Her old violation was removed from the association's compliance history, but the board did not pretend that every placement would have been allowed. It also made it credible. Susan proposed reimbursing the reasonable cost because the certified survey had resolved a boundary question the association should have verified before escalating enforcement. After council reviewed the proposal, the directors approved it as part of the corrective action. Karen voted against that motion too. 2 weeks after the hearing, the directors reassigned architectural enforcement oversight from the president to a 3-person committee working with the property manager. Boundary-based notices now required a second review whenever the location sat near the perimeter of the declaration. The green map remained in the association's records, but it changed. A new version removed the thick outer line that had been treated like a legal boundary. At the bottom, a box disclaimer stated that the plan was for administrative reference only and did not replace recorded plats, declarations, deeds, or certified surveys. The change looked small. It was not. For years, inspectors had been able to glance at one convenient drawing and assume the line was authoritative. Now, the procedure forced them to ask what document supported the line before issuing a notice that depended on it. Karen resisted the change at every meeting. She argued that the new process would make enforcement slower and encourage homeowners to hire lawyers over routine matters. Other directors responded that slowing down at the beginning was cheaper than correcting a mistake after fines accumulated. At the next regular board meeting, Susan introduced a motion to remove Karen as president while allowing her to remain a director until the next election. The motion cited loss of confidence in her handling of the flagpole dispute, her decision to continue fines after council recommended a pause, and her attempt to push a clarification resolution before the legal review was complete. There was no dramatic confrontation. Karen asked each director whether they supported the motion. 3 said yes. 1 abstained. Karen voted no. The motion passed. She gathered her papers, left the president's seat, and moved to a chair at the end of the table. No police arrived. No agency opened a criminal case. The consequence was administrative and personal. Karen lost the authority she had been so certain she possessed. Over the next month, the board completed the first round of perimeter reviews. A handful of homeowners received corrected compliance histories. 2 were offered partial reimbursements for work the board concluded had been ordered from the unsupported map line. Several other cases remained unchanged because separate restrictions applied. It was a recognition that rules still needed boundaries. Ryan's file became the example used in a new training packet for future board members and managers. The lesson was written in plain language. When a violation depends on where association authority begins or ends, verify the recorded documents before demanding compliance. The flagpole dispute had started with a 10-day deadline. It ended by changing the step that should have come before the first notice. By early fall, the survey flags were gone. The metal pins remained. Most people driving through Briar Glen would never have noticed them. They sat low in the grass near Ryan's driveway, small pieces of steel marking a line that had existed long before Karen arrived with a measuring tape and a green map. The flagpole remained exactly where Ryan had installed it. The concrete base was untouched. The landscaping around it had filled back in. On quiet mornings, Ryan would raise the flag, check the flower beds, and head inside before the neighborhood was fully awake. A few weeks after the board completed its first round of boundary reviews, Daniel Price stopped by while Ryan was cleaning leaves from the driveway. Daniel's fence reimbursement had arrived that morning. He held up the letter and shook his head. "All this because of your flagpole." Ryan looked toward the pole. "Not really." Daniel waited. Ryan pointed toward the edge of the lawn where one of the survey pins sat. "It was because of that line." They assumed the fight had been about whether an HOA could tell a homeowner what flag to fly. It had not. Karen had never ordered Ryan to stop flying the American flag. The original notice dealt with the pole as an exterior structure and claimed it violated height and setback rules. The real dispute was more basic. Where did the association's authority reach? For weeks, Karen had treated that question as settled because the HOA possessed a map with a thick green boundary. The map had been convenient. It had been familiar. It had been used repeatedly. But convenience was not the same as proof. The recorded declaration described one area. Ryan's deed described the property he owned. Lauren's survey placed those descriptions on the ground. When the documents were finally compared instead of assumed to agree, the difference became impossible to ignore. Authority has an edge. If an organization is going to demand that someone move a structure, pay a fine, or alter private property because of where a boundary lies, it has to know where that boundary comes from. Karen's mistake was not that she cared about rules. It was that she treated an internal administrative line as if no one had the right to ask what supported it. Then when Ryan asked, she treated the question itself like noncompliance. A simple request for a legal description became a final notice. A survey became another violation. A boundary question became an emergency hearing. And every time the evidence narrowed the association's position, Karen tried to preserve the result by changing the argument. In the end, none of that was stronger than the documents already sitting in county records. Months later, the new architectural committee still used maps. They still reviewed sheds, fences, exterior changes, and other projects. The difference was that the first page of the updated compliance guide contained a short instruction near the bottom. For perimeter properties, verify the controlling recorded boundary before issuing a location-based violation. It was not dramatic. Most homeowners would never read it. But Daniel's fence case had shown what happened when that step was skipped. Ryan's flagpole had shown how far a small assumption could travel once fines, deadlines, and official notices were built on top of it. The existing architectural rules could be reviewed normally where they actually applied. There was no need to turn one boundary mistake into a political rule for the entire neighborhood. The dispute ended where it should have begun, with the documents. One Saturday morning, he found Karen walking along the opposite side of the street. Karen did not stop. Ryan did not call after her. There was nothing left to argue about. The pole had never moved. The county records had not moved. The survey markers had not moved. What changed was the assumption that a line became real simply because someone in authority pointed to it. That was the larger reason the story mattered. Power is often loudest when it expects not to be questioned. Evidence is quieter. It sits in deeds, exhibits, measurements, dates, and signatures, waiting for someone patient enough to compare them. Ryan never defeated Karen by shouting louder. He asked where the line came from. He kept the notices. He hired the person qualified to measure it. He opened the documents that defined it. And when the board finally looked at the same evidence together, the argument ended at the exact place Karen had insisted it began. The boundary. The flag moved in the wind above Ryan's driveway. Below it, almost invisible in the grass, the marker stayed where it had always been.